There's no need for the Chicago Bears to panic at 4-3, but it does feel like there's a bit of an accountability issue when it comes to Tyrique Stevenson's antics, Matt Eberflus's decisions within the game, and also some of Shane Waldron's play calling as well.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use our promo code LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. On the show today, I want to look at accountability on the Chicago Bears team when it comes to public enemy number one right now, Tyrique Stevenson, who maybe is getting a little bit more criticism than he deserves, but also it doesn't feel like the Bears are going to respond in a super meaningful way either. So there's got to be a balance here between a lot coming from the outside and not like too much coming from the outside and not enough coming from the inside. And a lot of that falls on Matt Eberflus, who also needs to be part of this accountability effort and question here, where now you've got DJ Moore, Cole Kmet, and Kevin Byard and Jalen Johnson all talking about things not going right in the locker room and on the field and disagreeing with decisions that Matt Eberflus made in the games, and something seems to be off here. Again, we don't need to sound all the alarms or anything just yet, but it's something we need to keep an eye on here for sure. And we also got to talk about it with offensive coordinator Shane Waldron, where there continue to be questionable decisions that hold the Bears' offense back in games like this one against the Washington Commanders. But I think we need to start with Tyrique Stevenson, given all of the focus that's been on him since the Commanders game. Because, of course, you've probably all seen the video and the pictures by now of Tyrique Stevenson on the Hail Mary play, turning to the crowd and waving and taunting and whatever. He wasn't like taunting in terms of like egging on opposing fans. He ended up giving some description for what he was doing, but clearly, more importantly, not paying attention to the actual play and instead focusing on things in the stands rather than the wide receivers that are running downfield at him already. The ball has been snapped. Tyrique Stevenson is not looking at the quarterback, is not looking at the receivers. And of course, yes, he does have enough time to turn around, see the receivers coming, go over and be there for when the ball is in the air. But as we hypothesized and have since confirmed, Tyrique Stevenson was the one who was supposed to be covering Noah Brown on the tip on the back end of the Hail Mary. He was the one who was supposed to be there to keep some kind of coverage on Brown behind the big jump up for the ball in front of the end zone. And so he was not in the right position. And you wonder, if he wasn't taunting, could he have been more focused in the play and maybe kept track of Noah Brown? There's a lot of different steps here, but more so it's a little bit more about optics and the bad look. And it's not just the Hail Mary play. That's the other aspect of this. It's consistently being penalized in games. And this one, he was penalized for sticking a finger in the face mask of one of the Washington offensive linemen, and it was an unnecessary roughness call or whatever, or unsportsmanlike conduct or whatever they ended up calling it. It added 15 yards for Washington's offense. And we've seen him get involved in some of those moments in previous games as well. He got burned deep by Terry McLaurin for a 60-plus yard completion in this game as well. There were some rough moments from Tyrique Stevenson, and only encapsulated and made worse by his failings during the Hail Mary play at the end. It's not the kind of stuff that encapsulates what the Chicago Bears want their football players to do and play like. And so you would think there has to be some form of consequences. Even the word punishment feels strong, but consequences or punishment for something so that it's a clear message that, hey, this is not how we do things and this is not what belongs. Stevenson has since apologized to his teammates in front of the locker room and seems to have received some sort of humbling from the experience, but Matt Eberflus kind of makes it seem like that that might be it at this point, when I think you could make a case for at least some kind of symbolic short-term benching at the very least.
Yeah, I talk to the players all the time about it. It's great to have passion, and I think it's great to have that great enthusiasm for the game. I said, but it also comes to a point where your emotions go over the top, and then you lose focus. And you got to have to be able to have that balance. If you're that type of player that plays with great intensity, like Tyrique does, to be able to have that so it doesn't go over the top and you lose your focus and your concentration. That's for anybody, and each position is different. Obviously you can play at a higher temperature, if you're playing D tackle or something like that, or inside, but you got to really wire into your responsibilities there as you go forward.
What's the proper discipline for a player like that in a situation?
Meaning what, Courtney?
Just, I mean, it seems like there should be consequences for an action like that. How do you see that?
Yeah, we'll look at that. Again, those things are always going to be internal as we work with our players, as we go forward. And it's really about development, making everybody better. So we'll get to that answer as we go through the week. And but again, he did address the team in the team meeting room today. And again, it was a really good moment for him to be able to do that. It showed responsibility and accountability.
So I guess the question here is the embarrassment of the viral video and pictures just sort of the shame of everyone saw it and everyone hates the way it felt, and Tyrique Stevenson hates the way it felt, and he apologized to his teammates? Like, is that enough to correct the behavior, right? Because the way Matt Eberflus talked about it, he's like, we'll handle it internally there, but it didn't seem very clear. Like, he didn't come out and say, hey, yes, we're going to suspend him for 1 game, or we're going to bench him for the first half against the Cardinals, or even like the first quarter or the first drive, the first series. Like, you could come out and make a statement and say, hey, you know what? We love Tyrique, but he knows that behavior is unacceptable, and he knows that there's consequences for that kind of behavior, and so here's what the consequences are going to be, and it sends a message to the team that this is how we operate as the Chicago Bears. But it sounds a little bit more like that maybe they see the atonement and the apology and the way he has acted since that incident as enough from Stevenson. And I'll give them some benefit of the doubt here that they know better than we do how real Stevenson's response to this moment has been, right? We haven't talked to Tyrique Stevenson one-on-one. We don't know Tyrique Stevenson personally. We haven't seen the full extent of how he's responded to this situation. We get glimpses and pieces, and he spoke to the media a little bit about it and seemed to have a lot of contrition for it. And maybe the Bears genuinely feel like, hey, you know what? He's getting put through the ringer right now, and that's punishment enough. Everyone is mad at Tyrique Stevenson right now. Some people have said, oh, they should cut him tomorrow. They shouldn't let him back on the plane from Washington. Like, no, he's a pretty decent starting cornerback. You don't just cut those players. I could see, again, like a ceremonial benching is what feels like the appropriate thing to me. Okay, you sit out the first series so that when you look back at the stat sheet this year, you will not have started every game. You know what I mean? That you don't get a start on your record for the course of your career. Oh, he missed a start. Why did he miss a start that year? Oh, because he had been too emotional the game before there, right? I mean, like, it's not that much of a punishment, but it's sort of it's a little bit more symbolic of like, hey, see, if you behave like that, you don't belong as one of our starters for that game. Because, I mean, you don't want to sacrifice your defense by taking him out and putting in a backup who's not as good, right? You don't want to hurt the whole team and make your defense worse for too long. But for a series, I think you could survive it. But I don't know. It doesn't feel like there's a perfect punishment here that fits the crime exactly. And I'm guessing we won't really hear much more of it from here on out from Eberflus. And that's where it feels like maybe there's a little bit of an accountability issue among the players. And it certainly goes back up to the head coach here, where, boy, there were some really damning comments from Cole Kmet and others after this game that have you at least concerned and raising an eyebrow about how this team feels about their head coach and how they're responding to the coaching they're receiving in the locker room. So we'll hear from Cole Kmet and look at some of the accountability or lack thereof for Matt Eberflus next on Locked On Bears. The The Locked On Bears podcast is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel Sportsbook, America's #1 sportsbook. And FanDuel is helping to turn around your football season because they're going to give you a big win on all of the NFL action. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook apps gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL as well, all in one place. So if you want to bet $5 on Bears Cardinals, the Bears are 1.5-point underdogs on the road this week. The money line straight up for Bears is -104, and the over-under is set at 44.5. You place that $5 bet and you hit your pick right, you're going to get an extra $150 in bonus bets with that first $5 bet win. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel. Going to FanDuel.com and downloading the official sportsbook partner of the NFL. So we could spend an hour debating what exactly the punishment should be for Tyrique Stevenson or whatever, but it feels like the issue is a little bit bigger here than just one player getting too emotional in one game against Washington, right? I mean, it feels like there's sort of a consistent issue here of, say, like penalties, for example. The Bears continue to have a lot of penalties week in and week out that hurt this team and hold, especially this offense back, where you feel like, okay, that feels like a coaching thing to make sure guys are dialed in, locked in, focused, and know, the snap count on offense, or, don't consistently revert to holding on offense or defense or pass interference or anything like that. Like, penalties often feel like a coaching thing to me. And then, you get even more granular into this game. The way the Bears were unprepared on the Hail Mary play. They didn't have players in the right position. Feels like a coaching thing to have guys make sure they know where they need to be. You had 3 timeouts at that moment. You could have called a timeout and made sure you had everybody lined up where they need to be and know their responsibilities no matter how the play changes. Like, that's a big problem here. The play before the Hail Mary, where they just decided not to defend the sidelines and give the Commanders a free 13 or 15 yards in 6 seconds to get a closer Hail Mary to actually get to the end zone there, that Matt Eberflus continues to defend and say that was a good decision, and it absolutely was not. Even the Washington Commanders head coach Dan Quinn has said as much. Like, they were like, we needed that. That's what kept us in the game. It was absolutely critical for us to get that play. And Eberflus was like, it didn't really matter that much. But when the other team is telling you that it mattered a lot, at some point you got to look in the mirror and say, yeah, we should have done that differently. Like, even if you genuinely believe you shouldn't have done it differently, you got to lie to yourself and just say hey, our bad. Anytime something goes wrong, you just got to say, you know what? Yeah, you're right. We should have done it differently. It's kind of like getting in an argument with your spouse, right? It's like, even if you know you did unload the dishwasher or you did forget to bring the garbage can in or whatever, you still got to just kind of go with it, because it's not a hill that's worth dying on, right? And I feel like that's where Matt Eberflus should be with this play before the Hail Mary. It's like, okay, yeah, you clearly weren't trying to stop it, and you keep trying to say that was a good decision. Just let it go, man. You know what I mean? Even if you truly believe it was a good decision, just say, you know what? We got to be better. We should defend that play differently and move on, because no one, it's just not worth the fight there. But you also have 4th down decisions on when to punt and when to go for it this season. Challenging and not challenging plays. The Bears have not been very good in a lot of those situations. So it just feels like there's a lot of these things that are going wrong, and not a lot of saying yep, you know what? That's my bad. We got to do it differently. Or, oh, you know what? That exposed a weakness for us that now all of a sudden we do have to change, and we should have known it sooner. Just taking accountability and taking blame. And the head coach's job, no matter what, is to put the blame on themselves. Even when the blame belongs on players, the coach always has to put the blame on himself, even if it's not fair or whatever. That's the gig that you sign up for. And we just don't get nearly enough of that from Matt Eberflus. And what gets me concerned about this is that you have Kevin Byard and Jalen Johnson saying, yeah, we should have defended the sideline on that play. And Matt Eberflus says, no, I don't think we should have. And DJ Moore expressed something similar about multiple leaders on this offense and defense have said, yeah, we disagree with how the coaches decided to end that game. And we talked to the coaches about it now to tell them that we disagree. You've got players actively disagreeing with coaches, which is not by itself a terrible thing. But when this happens multiple times over the course of a season, it starts to feel like it could become a bigger problem. And the real scary thing for me here was what Cole Kmet said. And he wasn't trying to cause trouble here or stir up controversy, but this feels like the most damning critical quote here about what the Bears are dealing with right now that feels like a massive, massive coaching failure that runs all the way to the top.
And this is all like things done in the dark, things that only you know personally. And that's like if you're in the weight room, are you doing all 6 reps or are you doing 5 reps and getting out of there? Are you, when you're out on the field, are you getting the jugs after practice? Are you doing this? Or is your footwork correct in the walkthrough? And just those little things that can't necessarily always be addressed by a coach or another teammate, but things that you do in the dark that really come to fruition on game day. And I think that's what respecting the game is. And if you relentlessly respect the game, I think you'll get the results that you want. And unfortunately, if you get caught disrespecting the game in some form or fashion, it does come to get you at some point.
So there are things going on at practice in addition into the game where players are cutting corners a little bit and not necessarily taking it fully seriously. I mean, he talked about how, sometimes it's like guys not using the proper technique during a walkthrough when it's not really being evaluated closely, but it's like a personal thing, right? Do you make sure that you do it perfectly right every time, or just say, oh, well, it doesn't matter if I do it perfect this time. Like who cares if I don't do it perfectly in walkthrough? Or, when you're supposed to do 6 reps in the weightlifting and you do 5 and say, you know what, that's close enough. No one's counting. I can just do the 5 and move on. Like it's those kind of things that concern me, because Matt Eberflus's whole thing, the whole crowning principle that he was going to build for this Bears team is the hits stuff, right? Hustle and intensity and all that stuff with like no loafing and no taking plays off. They're going to be conditioned. They're going to do all the things the right way. And all they've talked about is acquiring football players who love football, who love to do the dirty work, who love to just squeeze out every possible ounce of talent that they can out of themselves because they just love the grind and love it all. And like, this seems like pretty clear evidence in opposition to that, or at least the beginnings of cracks in the facade and the foundation that the Matt Eberflus coaching regime has here. That there's this issue of accountability, of players not doing everything they're supposed to do or playing up to the level that they're supposed to play, and that falls on the coaching staff. And it feels like this team there's a tension bubbling here between the level of talent that Ryan Poles has acquired and the level of coaching that the coaching staff is getting them, where it's like, it's easy to sit here and say, well, the Bears are 4-3, so why are we talking about firing Matt Eberflus? Which, by the way, I have not said on this podcast. We talked about it last year, but we haven't talked about it this year yet. Like I'm not there yet today, but you kind of get this feeling like the Bears are 4-3 because of all the talent that Ryan Poles has acquired. But they've won 4 games because of all the talent Ryan Poles has acquired. They've lost 3 games more because of coaching, right? They take the lead late in the fourth quarter because of the players that Ryan Poles has acquired, but they lose it on the Hail Mary because of coaching, right? It's situations like that where it feels like the talent is maxing itself out here and is hitting this ceiling of coaching that may end up hurting the Bears and limiting just how far they can go with the talent Ryan Poles has acquired here. And it was easier to sort of overlook the last couple of seasons when it felt like the talent wasn't there either. So how could you really judge how good this coaching staff was when you weren't really sure about the quarterback and the offensive line had a lot of questions? The receiver didn't always have a lot of talent. The defense was still building. And there's still talent questions on this roster. It's not a perfect roster by any means, but the better the roster gets, the higher the expectations are on the coaching then to maximize that talent and win a lot of football games. And so the better you feel like the roster is, the more disappointing 4-3 is. Because if you feel like you should have a 5-2 roster or a 6-1 roster or a 7-0 roster and your team is 4-3 and you feel like, oh, the roster should be better, so the coaching must be what holds them back, that's where this tension builds, and that's where the rest of the season is going to be very interesting. And how the Bears do specifically against the Vikings, Lions, and Packers is going to go a long way. Because if you go 0-6 in this division, I don't know how well this coaching staff is going to survive. But, if you can go 3-3 against a good NFC North well, then I think these guys can get by. And I think I'm not ready to completely hit the eject button just yet, but clock's ticking, man. And it's getting to be put up or shut up time for this Bears coaching staff. That includes offensive coordinator Shane Waldron, who I think continues to slide under the radar a bit here because everyone talks about Tyrique Stevenson and the Hail Mary and everything we talked about today, but like offense has some real issues too. And there needs to be some accountability on that side of the ball as well, particularly for the play caller that we'll get into next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at Hillsdale College. Hillsdale College is offering more than 40 free online courses. That's right, totally free higher education. It's a college, and those college courses are being made available to you online at zero cost. So they've got things like Constitution 101 and the rise and fall of the Roman Republic and documentary style courses and economics and chemistry, and they've got classical music courses. I mean, a bunch of different things to scratch that curiosity itch. All of Hillsdale's courses are self-paced, so you can start whenever you want, tune in wherever you are, and you can go deeper with readings, quizzes, and discussions, or just enjoy the lectures, right? It's not like school where anybody's forcing you to go there, but if you're curious, you want to learn more and not take on any of that kind of debt that normally comes with college courses, Hillsdale College is the place for you. Go right now to hillsdale.edu/lockedon to enroll. There's no cost, and it's easy to get started. That's hillsdale.edu/lockedon to register. HILLSDALE, hillsdale.edu/lockedon. Locked On Bears is also brought to you by Prize Picks, the better way to play daily fantasy sports, because Prize Picks puts all the control in your hands. They make it accessible to everyone because you just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. So Prize Picks sets stat projections for the players. You decide which players to pick, and if you get your picks right, you're going to win big money. Unlike the other daily fantasy platforms where you're picking a lineup, and then your lineup is competing against other people's lineups, this is just you versus the Prize Picks projections, and that's what makes it that much more fun. Download the Prize Picks app today and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. So if your $5 lineup wins, great, you get a bunch of winnings and $50 extra. And if your $5 lineup doesn't win, that's okay. They're going to give you $5 even after you play your lineup, even if it's unsuccessful. So download the Prize Picks app today at Prize Picks. Run your game. This Bears offense couldn't score for almost 3 full quarters in this game. And even after the game was all said and done, the offense couldn't score more than 15 points. Scoring 15 points is not enough to win NFL football games. This Bears defense held Washington to 18. You should be able to score 18 as an offense and win NFL football games that way. This offense was not good enough. And we talked yesterday about how Caleb Williams was not good enough for 3 quarters of that game, was great in the fourth quarter, but not good enough for 3 quarters of this game. He needs to keep getting better. You know, the offensive line was a disaster in a lot of portions of this game, and that's a problem on its own. Like, there are issues with how the players are playing, and then there's the issue of the offensive coordinator and the play calling, where too often during games, there are play calls, moments, decisions that are just so questionable that you're sitting there scratching your head and you feel like that doesn't feel like an offensive coordinator getting the most out of his offense and finding ways to put his players in the best position to be successful. And that's kind of their whole job. Like, obviously, the obvious one is the handoff to Doug Kramer on the goal line, which again, like, Matt Eberflus has come out and defended and said, we like that play call. You know, we've practiced it. It was in our package. We were comfortable with going to it there, and it just didn't work out. And I think you can feel like, okay, we practiced this play, and it's not that you can never, ever run that play in an NFL game, but it's specifically that you run it at the goal line when you desperately need a yard and more so desperately need points. Right? When you have the opportunity to take the lead with this touchdown, that's not the time to go to that play. We can debate when exactly the time is to go to that play, but you don't hand it off to a center on a critical game situation. Like, of course, most short yardage situations are going to be important, but that one is particularly important to not blow it with a play call like that. Or you've got couple of other short yardage situations where they end up throwing the quick little smoke screen pass to the wide receiver. And some of that's Caleb reading the defense and saying, okay, off coverage and throwing the run pass option there. I also don't know if that's a decision you want to even, like, why even call the play with that as an option there? If you just need the yard, like, why even give it a pass option there? Just hand the ball off. And I think more broadly than any of those specific things, it's this bigger trend of like taking 3 full quarters plus to get the offense into rhythm, not having answers for what Washington was doing against you, particularly the blitz that they were bringing over and over again. Caleb Williams was under pressure on 60% of his plays, dropping back. More than half the time he dropped back to pass, there was pressure from the defense. The offensive coordinator has to give his quarterback options there, has to give his offensive line help there. Whether that's more quicker developing plays, a quick slant, a sort of double out routes. I mean, stick pattern. I mean, there's a lot of quick concepts you can build in to say snap, turn, throw, get rid of the ball, get a rhythm going. And they didn't do enough of that. You can run, I know it's been sort of a double-edged sword here, but like a running back screen pass behind the blitz. Sometimes the Bears haven't been able to execute that. Okay, I'm not going to kill Shane Waldron for it specifically, but like that's on the menu options that you can do when the other team is blitzing you a lot and having a lot of success getting pressure on your quarterback. You can find ways to get rid of the ball more quickly or keep them from being as aggressive defensively because they're getting burned by the blitz. You throw where the blitz was and find the space in the defense, and the Bears have been unable to do that. And there hasn't seemed to be a ton of accountability for Shane Waldron in that regard. I really loved here on the Locked On Podcast Network, one of the hosts of Locked On NFL Draft, Keith Sanchez, tweeted this out perfectly watching the Bears game. He said, the Bears play calling seems like they try the most difficult thing first and then try the obvious thing, right? Like it feels like the Bears want to try and get fancy or get cute or just try the complicated, do too much and like, oh, we can hand off to the center. They're never going to see it coming, where it's like, just do the obvious thing first. And if the obvious thing doesn't work, okay, then you could try and get creative from there. But it's like they're trying to beat themselves, before the defense beats them. It's sort of like the idea, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And the Bears aren't even giving it a chance to break first. You know what I mean? Hand it off to Roschon Johnson at the goal line. And then if they stop that, okay, what are our other options? Maybe you hand it off to Doug Kramer then, or maybe you throw a pass then, but try the obvious thing first, make them stop that first, then go to your other options. Whereas the Bears come out and they say hey, let's try this. Let's throw this. Let's hand it off to Doug Kramer here. Oh, that didn't work. All right. Then, okay, we could fall back on handing it to Roschon Johnson. But it's like you're taking that in the wrong order here. Do the obvious thing first, make them stop you, and then try the more complicated thing after that if they stop you. But make them have to stop you first. Make them beat you in the ways that you don't want them to before you try and get a step ahead of that. But it's like you try and get 2 steps ahead when you could just take the first step first there. Now, I will give Shane Waldron a little bit of credit because there were moments in this game where they did have good plays. The 2-point conversion, shovel pass to Cole Kmet worked very nicely. It was a little complicated. It wasn't the obvious thing, but it worked. And there was a handoff in that game that DJ Moore took. They faked a run to one way to Swift and then handed off to DJ Moore and he knifed up the middle for a 10-yard gain. Waldron can design some good plays that work sometimes. He's not useless as an offensive coordinator. He's certainly not the worst Bears offensive coordinator we've ever seen, or people get really hyperbolic about it and stuff. He's not terrible. It's not as though he has zero redeeming qualities as an offensive coordinator. It's just do more of the obvious stuff first. And to his credit, he did stick with the running game with DeAndre Swift, even when they weren't getting a ton of yards on the ground, but just kind of stuck with it until eventually things broke free and he had the big, whatever it was, 50-plus yard touchdown run in that game, even though you could have been a little bit less patient and abandoned the running game earlier when you're getting 2 yards here and 3 yards there. So, there's signs of stuff from Waldron, and we've seen him be open to changing up his schemes. The offense looks a lot different from week 1 to what it does look now, but we still need to see more. We still need to feel more like the coaching staff isn't holding back the talent on that side of the ball either, and it's not quite there yet. That's the other tough thing about Eberflus, right, is the defense generally playing well. So, okay, do you hit the panic button and say fire Matt Eberflus when you have a top 5 defense that he's coaching? It's well, it's more complicated than just Bears lost a frustrating game, fire everybody. The coaches must be doing everything wrong. It's like, no, they're doing stuff wrong that's bad and hurting the team, but they're not doing everything wrong. So how we parse that out and what level of patience or benefit of the doubt you're supposed to have with that is a complicated, nuanced discussion that we can't even do in one singular episode of Locked On Bears. But we'll keep talking about this over the course of the season, depending on how the results go. I mean, you beat Arizona and you beat New England, and all of a sudden everyone's feeling fine again about the Bears. And then, you lose to Detroit and Green Bay and Minnesota, and then all of a sudden the sky's falling again. We've been doing too big of a swings, I think, collectively as Chicago Bears fans, between everything was great the last 3 weeks and now everything is completely falling apart this week. And the truth is somewhere in the middle. We always try and find you the truth somewhere in the middle here on the Locked On Bears podcast. So I hope you'll hit that subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. That's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. If you're looking for a second listen today, check out the Locked On NFL podcast. We cover the league from league-wide perspective, and I co-host the Tuesday morning edition of Locked On NFL with Tyler Rowland. But Locked On NFL comes out twice a day. Tyler Rowland in the morning, Tony Wiggins in the barbershop in the afternoon. But me and Tyler are talking Monday Night Football. We're actually going to talk about some Arizona Cardinals, and they're taking first place in the NFC West right now, so you can get a little bit of a Bears opponent preview a little bit there, and a bunch of other NFL topics coming for you at the same time this podcast is coming out. So go check out Locked On NFL for your second listen. Come back and make Locked On Bears your first listen once again tomorrow for another opportunity to bear down.